In their eyes, I was the woman who failed, the one who walked out of her MBA program with nothing but a silent bus ticket to nowhere. 7 years later, I am the colonel they never saw coming. Tomorrow morning, I will step into Falcon Tech with the full authority of the Department of Defense, the same place my brother calls his kingdom, the same company my family praises at every dinner table. They believe he built something that can't be questioned, but they don't know the final decision belongs to me. In 24 hours, every secret, every line of code, every promise will be laid bare. I am not here for revenge. I am here because I no longer need their approval. I only need the truth, and when that moment comes, they will have no choice but to see me as I am. The Greyhound bus rolled to a stop beside a cracked gas station on the edge of Mobile, Alabama. I stepped off with my old army duffel dragging behind me, the heat pressing against my skin like an accusation. No one was waiting, no welcome sign, no message that said they were glad I'd come home. But this wasn't a homecoming. This was a return with purpose. I looked up at the sagging oak trees, their branches heavy with the weight of years I had spent proving I was more than the girl who left. I took a slow breath and started down the gravel path toward the house. Every step felt like walking back into a life I had outgrown. I wasn't here to belong. I was here to finish what I started. The house still looked the same. 2 stories of pale siding and a porch that once felt safe. I remembered sitting there as a child believing that effort alone could make me worthy. The white fence was peeling now. The silver front door hadn't changed. Before I could knock, it opened. My mother, Margaret Thompson, stood in the doorway. She stared at me for 3 long seconds, her expression blank. "Your father's out back," she said. "Michael's on his way." No hug, no warmth, just her voice flat and practiced as if I were a delivery she hadn't asked for. She turned and walked away without another word. I stepped inside and felt the air turn heavy around me. Home had never been simple. Today it felt like a place that barely remembered me at all. The living room was a shrine to Michael. His face filled every frame along the walls, school medals, robotics trophies, awards from Falcon Tech. One photo showed him shaking hands with Victoria Grant, the CEO everyone in the industry respected. Underneath the glass, the plaque read, "Michael Thompson, the next generation." I walked past each picture without touching them. Upstairs, my old bedroom waited frozen in time. Same narrow bed, same striped curtains, the bookshelf lined with the paperbacks I loved in high school. I set my duffel on the floor and opened it carefully. Inside lay my uniform, folded crisp, the colonel insignia catching the light. I touched it with one hand. Not yet. The rank wasn't for them. It was for every day I kept showing up when no one believed I would. Outside, I heard the low hum of the lawnmower. I walked to the back porch and saw my father, James Thompson, pushing it in slow, even lines. His white shirt was soaked through with sweat, but he still stood straight. When he looked up and saw me, he cut the engine. Silence fell between us, heavy and familiar. "How long are you staying?" he asked. His voice didn't carry judgment, only a tired distance. "Long enough to finish what I came here to do," I said. He nodded once and turned back to the yard as if the grass mattered more than my return. I watched him move steady and unchanging. He had always believed stability was the same thing as love, but standing there, I knew better. Sometimes stability was just a way to ignore what you didn't want to see. That evening, we sat down for dinner, the first meal together in years. My mother had set the table with her best dishes. Honey glazed roast, beef green beans, cornbread, the same beef stew she used to make when we were kids. Michael arrived wearing a tailored blazer with the Falcon Tech logo stitched on the pocket. His confidence filled the room the moment he walked in. My father clapped him on the back, beaming with pride. Jessica, my cousin, had come too. She smiled bright and polished her hair perfectly arranged. The conversation turned quickly to Michael's new title. Every word felt rehearsed. I sat at the end of the table, cutting my food in quiet motions. No one asked where I had been. No one mentioned my years in uniform. It was as if I had never left, as if I had never mattered. Jessica tried to pull me into the conversation. "Sarah, didn't you lead a counterinsurgency unit last year?" I nodded. "That's right. 6 months of daily operations." Before I could explain, my mother waved her hand, her smile tight. "But then you transferred to logistics, didn't you? Probably more manageable." Her voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any accusation. I set my fork down, steadying my breath. It wasn't about what was manageable, Mom. It was about where I could do the most good. Logistics in combat zones wasn't paperwork. It was survival. Michael leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. Still, he said, "Imagine if you hadn't left your MBA. You could have been part of Falcon Tech's leadership." I looked at him calmly. I didn't leave. I chose. For a moment, no one spoke. My father cleared his throat, trying to smooth the silence. Regardless, he began Michael's "Earn this." Aegis X is the most ambitious project Falcon Tech has ever launched. Fully autonomous tactical AI. This is history. I nodded slowly. That's exactly why it needs oversight, not just internal reviews. My mother's brow tightened. What oversight? I folded my napkin and placed it next to my plate. Tomorrow morning, Colonel Sarah Thompson, acting representative of the Department of Defense, will attend the final evaluation session. Michael's expression shifted, a flicker of something like disbelief. "You're the DOD representative?" he asked, voice low. I met his eyes without blinking. Yes. Every document, every scenario, every claim had passed through my office. For the first time, the room felt smaller than my purpose. No one moved. It was as if the air itself had thickened, pressing down on all of us. My mother opened her mouth but said nothing. Jessica looked between Michael and me, her eyes wide as if she were watching a slow collision. I stood up, smoothing the front of my shirt. "Thank you for dinner." My voice was even. I didn't need to shout to be heard anymore. I walked out of the dining room, leaving behind a silence deeper than any argument. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my old bed. The window overlooked the backyard where Michael and I used to play. Now it felt like a stage I had stepped away from for good. I opened my duffel again, lifting the uniform from its folds. The colonel insignia caught the last light of evening. Not validation, just truth. I placed the uniform on the bed, smoothing each crease with my hand. Every button, every stitch was a record of choices no one else had to understand. I remembered the early days, sleeping on cold concrete, being mistaken for someone's assistant, hearing my name spoken with doubt. But I kept showing up, kept standing where I wasn't invited, until one person finally looked past the assumptions. General Catherine Blake. She never asked why I left my MBA, never questioned if I was strong enough. She only asked one thing: "Do you stand by your decisions?" That was the moment everything changed. I folded the jacket and placed it back in my duffel. Tomorrow wasn't about proving I belonged. It was about showing that I had never needed their permission to lead. Morning came with a soft haze over the yard. I dressed in my uniform, each movement steady, deliberate. The fabric felt heavier than I remembered, but it also felt right. In the mirror, my reflection looked back with quiet resolve. Not a daughter, not a sister, a colonel. I walked downstairs, the house still silent. My mother stood by the front door, twisting her hands together. She didn't say anything as I passed. Outside, a military vehicle waited at the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door for me. I glanced back once at the porch. Margaret watched from behind the screen, her eyes unreadable. I gave a small nod, not expecting one in return. Then I climbed inside and let the door close behind me. The engine rumbled to life. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened. Falcon Tech rose out of the city like a glass monument. Sharp lines, bright steel, a place built to impress and intimidate. Inside the lobby hummed with quiet energy. Engineers in suits, contractors with clipped voices. A receptionist glanced up as I approached the desk. I handed over my identification badge. Her eyes widened when she read the title, Colonel Sarah Thompson, Department of Defense. She swallowed hard and nodded. "Third floor, ma'am." I thanked her and walked to the elevators, my boots silent on the polished floor. When the doors opened, I stepped inside alone. As they closed, I took one slow breath. I wasn't here to prove a point. I was here because this was my responsibility, and no part of me felt small anymore. The elevator doors slid open to a long corridor lined with glass walls. At the end, a set of double doors stood wide. Inside, the main conference room buzzed with anticipation. Engineers, legal advisors, defense contractors, every seat was filled. At the front, Michael stood in his crisp suit, speaking with smooth authority. Animated slides flickered behind him, showing battlefield simulations. He didn't see me enter. Not at first. I walked quietly to the row of chairs reserved for the Department of Defense. The moment I sat down, the mood shifted. His voice faltered just for a breath. A few heads turned, then more. Michael's eyes locked on mine, disbelief washing over his face. He cleared his throat, trying to recover, but the balance of the room had already changed. I opened my folder, pen in hand. I was ready to listen. Victoria Grant, Falcon Tech's CEO, moved from her seat without hesitation. Tall, composed, her platinum hair cut in a clean line. She walked straight to me and offered her hand. "Colonel Thompson," she said, her voice clear, "it's an honor to have you here." I stood and shook her hand firmly. "Thank you, Ms. Grant. I'm looking forward to the presentation." Around us, whispers rippled through the room. My mother had arrived too, standing near the back wall. Her gaze was fixed on me, uncertain in a way I'd never seen. Michael shifted his weight, trying to reclaim the center of attention. He cleared his throat again and turned to the screen. As I was saying, he began his voice tighter. "The tactical response module integrates real-time decision layers for autonomous engagement." I sat down, pen ready, and let the room settle into the new reality. No one could ignore my presence now. Michael continued speaking, his tone practiced but stretched thin. He moved through slides showing system architecture and live simulations. I listened without interrupting, my notes deliberate. Every diagram was familiar. I had reviewed them all line by line. At the back of the room, my mother stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. When Michael paused to drink water, I raised my hand. "Can you confirm the encryption phase for the threat detection module?" I asked evenly. His eyes flickered. "Team A2 authored that under my supervision." I nodded slowly. "That's the same team that reused an algorithm rejected in Draft 12 for latency exceeding acceptable parameters." A hush fell over the room. Michael's hand tightened around his glass. I let the silence hold. Then I said, softer but unmistakable, "If I stayed silent, I'd be failing the people who trusted me to see what you'd prefer to ignore." No one moved. Even the air felt brittle. Victoria Grant studied me carefully, her expression cool but engaged. Michael's throat worked as he swallowed. "I'll have my team revalidate the protocol," he managed, voice uneven. I made a single note in my folder, the pen steady in my hand. My father shifted behind Michael, eyes cast down. I glanced at the rows of engineers, their focus pinned on us. This wasn't about personal vindication anymore. It was about the standard none of us could betray. Michael tried to clear his voice, but it cracked anyway. He turned back to the next slide, and when he spoke again, the confidence was gone. Only the careful precision of someone who finally knew he was being seen for the first time. The presentation moved forward in measured steps. Michael described contingency plans, but each word sounded smaller than before. I sat silent, pen resting against my folder. Around me, the room had shifted. No one looked at Michael with blind admiration. No one looked at me with dismissal. When he closed the final slide, he didn't lift his gaze. "That concludes our review," he said, his voice low. I stood, adjusting my uniform. "My preliminary findings will be submitted by the end of the week," I told them. "Final clearance or hold will follow after the Oversight Board's decision." Victoria Grant inclined her head, her tone even. "We trust your judgment, Colonel Thompson." I didn't smile. I simply closed my folder, and in that small pause, everyone in the room understood the balance had changed forever. I walked out of the conference room without looking back. My boots echoed down the corridor, each step steady, unhurried. At the elevators, I paused and let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. When the doors opened, I stepped inside alone. The ride down was quiet, almost peaceful. In the lobby, a few people turned to watch me pass, some with curiosity, some with something closer to respect. Outside, the early afternoon sun pressed against the glass facade of Falcon Tech. I stood for a moment near the entrance, feeling the warmth on my face. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. I wasn't the daughter who left, or the sister who failed. Today I was exactly who I had chosen to become. And for once, that was enough. I didn't go back to the house right away. Instead, I sat in the car, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. 20 minutes passed in stillness. No calls, no messages, no one demanding to know how it went. I stared through the windshield at nothing in particular, feeling the last traces of adrenaline slip away. There were no tears, no anger, just a quiet certainty I hadn't known before. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message from Jessica Michael and your father wanted to talk. Backyard. I read it twice, my thumb hovering over a reply. Then I set the phone down without answering. Some conversations couldn't be avoided forever. I started the engine and turned toward the old neighborhood, unsure what waited there, but ready all the same. The sun was beginning to set when I pulled into the driveway. Long shadows stretched across the porch, painting the siding in soft gold. I walked around to the backyard, my boots crunching over dry leaves. The oak tree we used to climb still stood, its branches heavy with memory. By the stone table, my father waited, arms folded tight across his chest. Michael stood a few feet away, leaning against a wooden post, his face unreadable. My mother sat on the bench, her hands twisting a napkin over and over. No one spoke as I approached. The air felt dense, thick with everything we'd never said. I stopped a few steps away, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Michael was the first to break the silence. So this was all about proving you were better than us. His voice was sharp but tired. I shook my head once. No, I said quietly. It was never about that. Michael lifted his eyebrows, waiting. Then what was it about? He asked, his voice softer now, almost uncertain. I looked at him and didn't look away. I did it because I'm good at it, I said. Because there are people out there whose lives depend on the choices we make behind closed doors. My father let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. Sarah, he began, his voice rough. I never meant to question your ability. But you should have told us. It felt like you were hiding something. I swallowed, feeling the old ache in my throat. Dad, I spent years trying to prove I was enough, but you never asked what it felt like to be ignored. My mother's eyes shimmered, though she didn't speak. Michael shifted his weight, looking down at the grass. No one had an easy answer, and maybe that was the truth we all shared. My mother's voice broke the silence, small and fragile. I just wanted you to have a life that wouldn't wear you down. I turned to her, my hands steady at my sides. Stability doesn't mean invisibility, I said. Did you think I didn't notice? Every time you compared me to Michael, every time you decided he was the smart one, the strong one, Michael let out a short, bitter laugh and pressed a hand to his temple. You think it was easy for me? He asked, his voice low. I fought for every inch I had. You have no idea what I gave up. I took a step closer, my words calm. And you think I didn't? I spent 7 years missing birthdays and holidays, and no one called to ask if I was okay. The quiet settled again, heavier than before. I looked at each of them, my voice steady. I didn't come back to punish you. I came because it was my duty. My father closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had softened around the edges. We were wrong, he said quietly, to underestimate you. I'm sorry for that. He looked over at my mother, but she didn't say anything. Her tears were answer enough. Michael pushed away from the post, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for hours. You've proven your point, he said, his voice rough. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. I looked at him, feeling the old ache lift just a little. He held out his hand. I didn't take it. Instead, I stepped forward and pulled him into a hug. His shoulders stiffened, then eased. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need to be right. I only needed to be seen. 6 months later, autumn turned the streets of Washington, D.C. into rivers of gold. From my apartment window, I could see the Pentagon in the distance, its silhouette softened by dusk. That evening, I set the table for dinner. Nothing fancy, just something quiet, something my own. I made Southern beef stew, the same recipe my mother had used all those years. The scent filled the kitchen, warming corners I hadn't realized were still cold. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find General Catherine Blake standing there, tall and composed. She smiled, her eyes kind. Smells like home, she said. I laughed, feeling something inside me ease. Come in, I told her. My family arrived not long after. Michael, my parents, Jessica. This time no one avoided my gaze. No one pretended I was invisible. We all just sat together, and for the first time it felt enough. Dinner was simple, and no one tried too hard to fill the silence. Jessica talked about her new fintech project in Atlanta. Michael shared how Falcon Tech was finally stabilizing under better leadership. My father asked General Blake questions, his tone respectful in a way I'd never heard before. When I stood to bring out dessert, my father held up a hand. Wait a moment, Sarah. He reached for a padded envelope beside his plate. Slowly, he pulled out a framed newspaper clipping. The headline read, Colonel Thompson leads Aegis X reform. In the photo, I stood at the front of a military operations room giving orders. He said it gently in front of me. I had it framed, he said. It's in my office. When people ask about my daughter, I point to this. I looked up, surprised by the tremor in his voice. Then I smiled, not wide but honest. General Blake's eyes moved around the table, her expression thoughtful. I didn't discover her talent. She said her voice clear but warm. I was just the first person willing to see it. Michael shifted in his chair, meeting my gaze without resentment this time. You did something, he said quietly, that I don't think I'll ever be brave enough to do. My mother reached across the table, her hand finding mine. Her palm was warm, trembling just a little. I'm proud of you, she whispered. The words didn't feel like victory. They felt like a door quietly unlocking. I nodded, not because I needed her to say it, but because hearing it made something settle in my chest. I looked around at them, feeling the moment land gently instead of like a burden. For the first time, it didn't feel like I was proving anything. I was simply living. 2 weeks later, an official letter arrived from West Point Military Academy. It was heavy in my hands, the seal pressed deep into the envelope. Inside, a formal invitation. They were asking me to deliver the commencement speech for the first all-female graduating class in cyber warfare. I sat on the couch, letter resting across my knees, the afternoon light slanting through the blinds. It wasn't about rank or reputation anymore. It was about the journey. About every night I'd questioned if I was enough. About every morning I decided to keep going. I closed my eyes and let the quiet fill me. Then I picked up a pen and signed my acceptance. Not out of pride, out of something quieter and stronger. A simple understanding that sometimes being seen isn't the end. It's just the beginning. On the day of the speech, a soft rain fell over West Point. I stood backstage, uniform-pressed hands resting lightly on the podium's edge. Through the curtain, I could see rows of cadets, their faces bright with hope and nerves. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight and the honor of this moment. 10 years ago, I had sat where they were. Unsure, hungry to prove something I couldn't even name. When the announcer called my name, the room fell into a respectful hush. I stepped forward, the echo of my boots steady against the polished floor. At the podium, I paused and looked into all those expectant eyes. To many, I began, voice clear, we are the ones who go against the current. A few heads nodded, eyes glistening. But sometimes I continued, it's the current itself that needs changing. Applause rose warm and unforced, and I finally let myself feel it. After the ceremony, a young cadet waited by the stage steps. Her uniform was too big across the shoulders, her cap set carefully in her hands. When I approached, she lifted her chin and met my gaze without hesitation. Colonel Thompson, she said, her voice soft but steady. I almost quit last year. Your story made me stay. I felt something loosen in my chest, a warmth I hadn't expected. I took her hand in both of mine. Don't live to prove something, I told her gently. Live for what you believe in. Her eyes shone, and for a moment I saw my younger self standing there. All the doubt, all the hope. When she finally stepped away, I watched her disappear into the crowd of uniforms and knew she would be just fine. It was never about being the strongest, it was about showing up anyway. That afternoon I flew back to DC, the plane cutting through layers of quiet clouds. The city lights blinked below as we landed, small and distant like another lifetime. When I got home, Jessica was waiting outside my apartment door. She held up 2 plane tickets, her smile already answering any question I might have asked. You've never been to Seattle, she said. Thought maybe we could see something new. I looked at her, this cousin who had never once tried to shrink me. She was radiant in a way that never felt threatening, only steady. For a moment, I felt how far we had both come. From being overlooked daughters to women choosing their own directions. I took the tickets from her hand. Her grin widened. Shall we go? I nodded once, feeling the simplest kind of gratitude. Not for escaping the past, but for carrying it without fear. Winter came early that year. The city settled under a quiet layer of frost, the mornings pale and still. One evening, I walked alone through the Pentagon's long corridors. The walls gleamed under soft lights, each doorway a reminder of how many stories had passed through here. I carried a warm cup of coffee, its steam curling into the cold air. Outside, snow blurred the world beyond the glass. I stopped near a window and watched the flakes fall. Project Aegis X had officially moved into its final operational phase. My role was nearly complete. In a few days, I'd hand everything over to a younger team, bright and certain. General Blake had told me this was how it should be, one generation stepping aside so another could rise. I rested my hand on the cool metal of the railing and felt something settle inside me. Not regret, just a quiet readiness for whatever came next. General Blake joined me by the window, her steps measured and calm. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me watching the snowfall. Finally, she turned her eyes steady on mine. "You built something worthy of trust," she said. Her voice was low, carrying more weight than any metal. "But there's still an entire world out there, Sarah, and it's waiting for your next mark." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my chest. I had spent so long thinking my worth depended on other people's recognition. But standing there, I realized it was never about their approval. It was about whether I could look at my own reflection and know I had tried. I looked back out at the falling snow. The future didn't feel like an empty space anymore. It felt like an open road. I didn't leave the military completely, but I didn't return to the same path either. I took an extended leave, something most people called a pause. For me, it was a chance to breathe, to decide how I wanted to keep serving without losing myself again. Some days I spent hours walking the quiet streets of DC, watching the way winter light turned every building softer. Other days I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook, letting the pages stay empty until words felt honest. I started to write not reports or briefings, but pieces of memory, little fragments of who I had been and who I was still becoming. It didn't feel like starting over. It felt like finally stepping into a life I chose without apology. And each morning I woke up lighter than I had in years. Michael and I stayed in touch, though our conversations were careful at first. When I visited Mobile again, he didn't avoid my eyes. He met me on the porch, hands in his pockets, a little unsure. One evening, we sat on the back steps as the sun slipped behind the oak tree. He told me about the nights he'd doubted everything he'd built, about the mistakes he was learning to own without excuses. I listened without interruption, not because it erased the past, but because it felt honest. When he finished, he looked over at me and nodded as if to say he finally understood something he'd never seen before. I nodded back. We didn't hug or say any big words, but in that small quiet, I felt something shift between us. We were no longer just siblings trying to outshine each other. We were two grown people finally willing to see the whole story. My mother stopped asking me to wear flowered dresses to family dinners. That Christmas, she handed me a box wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a pair of black leather boots, sturdy and elegant. She cleared her throat, her voice unsteady. "I thought they fit a colonel's spirit better," she said, her eyes glistening. I traced a hand over the smooth leather, feeling how much it meant that she had chosen them. Not out of obligation, but out of respect. For once, she didn't remind me to eat more or to think about settling down. She just sat beside me, quiet and present. My father lifted his glass across the table. "To Sarah," he said. "She taught us that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep going." No one tried to correct him. I raised my glass, feeling the simple peace of belonging without having to earn it. Jessica moved to DC a few months later. We found a small apartment with tall windows and old creaking floors. It felt like the right kind of imperfect, like a place two women could build something new without explaining themselves. Most evenings we cooked together or sat by the window with mugs of tea, the city unfolding beneath us. Sometimes we talked about the years it took to feel worthy. Other nights we didn't say much at all, just being there was enough. One weekend we unpacked the last of the boxes. Jessica found the framed newspaper article my father had given me. She set it on the shelf without asking if I wanted it displayed. She already knew. It wasn't about pride or proving anything. It was about remembering how far I had come and how much further I still wanted to go. One cold evening, Jessica and I walked around the lake near our building. The water was half frozen, the wind sharp against our faces. We moved in easy silence, steps matching without effort. After a while, she turned to me, her breath clouding in the dark. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that if we'd been born into a different family, it all might have been easier?" I stopped walking, considering her question. The old ache was still there, but it didn't hurt the same way anymore. "No," I said finally, "because without all those years of being doubted, maybe I wouldn't have learned how strong I really am." Jessica nodded, her eyes warm in the dim light. And without you, I added, I wouldn't have made it this far. We didn't say anything else. We just kept walking side by side, the cold air settling around us like a promise. When we got home, the apartment was quiet except for the old radiator humming in the corner. I set my keys on the counter and looked around the living room, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Contentment that didn't require anyone's permission. Jessica hung up her coat and turned to me with a small smile. You look like someone who finally exhaled, she said. I laughed, surprised by how true it sounded. It feels that way, I admitted. Outside, snow started falling again, soft against the window glass. I poured us each a cup of tea and carried them to the couch. We sat without filling the space with noise, just the quiet and the certainty that neither of us needed to be anywhere else. Some nights were loud with memory, but this one was simple. Two women who had chosen their own story, and were still writing it one honest day at a time. Winter lingered longer than usual. One morning, I stood by the window watching the city wake under a thin layer of snow. My uniform hung in the closet, pressed and waiting, but for the first time, I didn't feel the need to wear it to remember who I was. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth steady me. There were no more meetings to prove myself, no more dinners where I had to explain my worth. Jessica joined me by the window, her hair still damp from the shower. She leaned her shoulder lightly against mine. Do you ever wish you could go back and tell her, she asked. Tell the girl on that bus that it was going to be okay? I thought about it. Then I shook my head. She wouldn't have believed me, I said. But maybe that's how you learn. You just keep going. That evening, we walked once more around the quiet lake. The wind was cold, but it didn't bite the way it used to. Jessica slipped her arm through mine and we moved in unhurried steps. I looked up at the dark sky, feeling the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. The kind you only notice when the noise has finally gone quiet. Maybe I hadn't ended up with a perfect story. Maybe no one ever does. But standing there, I understood something simple. A meaningful life isn't built on applause or validation. It's built on the courage to keep writing even when no one promises you a happy ending. I closed my eyes and let the cold brush against my face. When I opened them, Jessica was smiling. And in that moment, I knew I had everything I needed. Thank you for listening. If this story found a quiet place in you, share your own. Your voice matters. It always has. If you felt something in this story, recognition, hope, or just a quiet understanding, don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story deserves to be heard too. And if you'd like to keep walking alongside voices like this, subscribe to the channel. There is more to come and I'd be honored to have you here for the next chapter.